Hello, everybody. My name is Aaron, and I'm here with episode 1 of the Big Shots Basketball Podcast. This is a new podcast. I'm just now starting. I've always wanted to start a podcast pretty much, for the last probably 7 or 8 years of my life. Maybe not that long. That's probably about how long I've been watching basketball, but I've always been intrigued by, watching and listening to people talk about the game. And it's always been like a passion of mine, something that I wanted to do myself. So, here we are today with the start of my new podcast. So, what we're actually going to be talking about today in episode 1 is NBA Power Ranking predictions for the 2019-2020 NBA season, and maybe a little bit of in-depth analysis about some of the big-time moves that happened in free agency this year, because as you know, there was a lot. So, let's just jump right into it. We're going to start off with the Eastern Conference. Now, personally, this conference was actually a little hard for me to make this list about because, quite frankly, so many of these teams are so close, like closely related and closely matched, that really, like, the whole bottom half of this list could be scrambled up. But nonetheless, I put it together. Can't say that my list won't change throughout the season or maybe even within the next week. Who knows? But my number one, we'll just jump right in this. My number one team is going to be the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, I know they did lose Malcolm Brogdon, Nikola Mirotic, but I feel like even with those two leaving, this team is still very strong. They had a very good run last year in the playoffs. And quite frankly, if it wasn't for Kawhi Leonard, they would have made it to the finals. Giannis was MVP last season, which was really, he had a very great year. They still have Eric Bledsoe. They still have Chris Middleton, along with Brook Lopez. So a lot of the core of their team is still there. They just lost Malcolm Brogdon, who was a very good player for them. And I know that the Pacers definitely got a good pickup there. Not really too much else to say about that. Now, the number 2 team, I actually put in the 76ers, the Philadelphia 76ers. This is actually a team that is going to be very closely matched with that Bucks team. Both of them will probably be 58 to 62 win teams. Really, they could be first seed as well. It's all just going to depend on, injuries, load management, all that good stuff. Also, a lot of it, in my opinion, has to do with how well Ben Simmons comes out this season. Has he developed a jump shot? Has he improved his game? Because in order for them to make that jump, in my opinion, he's going to have to improve. They did lose Jimmy Butler. I don't feel like it was that big of a deal. He was good for them, especially in the playoffs. But they also picked up Al Horford, who was, quite frankly, the Embiid stopper. So if you can't beat him, then just put him on your team, I guess. They also have a lot more experience in the playoffs now. This team is getting older. They're still very young, but they're getting more experience. They're not necessarily old. They're just getting more experienced, and quite frankly, they're going to be dangerous this year. They also kept Tobias Harris, who was good for them. I can't say he's the greatest player, but he was last year, on that all-star level almost. This is where the list starts getting a little shaky for me. The next team I have up is the Boston Celtics. Now, last year was a disappointing year for them. They didn't finish quite where they wanted to. They had a disappointing playoff run, but quite frankly, that team was just dysfunctional last season, and I don't feel like they're going to have that same problem this year. Al Horford is gone. They did lose him, which was a big hit on them. In my opinion, that was harder on them than losing Kyrie Irving. But they also added Kemba Walker, who has been great in Charlotte, and if he would have had a team around him in Charlotte, they could have possibly made a playoff run. He had a very great year last year. They also added Enes Kanter, who I guess was supposed to be their way of replacing Al Horford. I don't think that's going to happen. He's obviously not going to be Al Horford, but he will be good. He's not going to be all-star level, but he had a good year in New York last year. Obviously, he was in New York, but I think that he was good on those Oklahoma City teams as well before he went to New York. He wasn't Steven Adams, but he was good. Again, this list, it can be changed as well. Some of these teams are just so closely matched. My next team up at the number 4 seed is the Brooklyn Nets. They were able to keep some of their young players like Karis LeVert. They were able to sign Kevin Durant, which was a huge signing for them, especially if he comes back healthy, which obviously won't be next season. He's already been told he was staying out next season. But 2020, 2021, that team's going to be dangerous. They also brought in Kyrie Irving, who is incredibly talented. He just wasn't an amazing leader. I'm not going to say he was a bad leader, but he wasn't the leader that they needed him to be in Boston, and he was a cause of a lot of that dysfunctionality. They also brought in DeAndre Jordan, who, as a Clippers fan, I'm actually a big fan of. I like DeAndre Jordan in the Lob City days. Obviously, he's not the same DeAndre Jordan that he was, but he is still good. The next team up is going to be the Indiana Pacers. Now, personally, I wanted to put this team higher, but with Victor Oladipo probably going to miss some of the beginning of next season, it's hard to put them any higher than 5. They did bring in Malcolm Brogdon, who I think is a very good young player. That was a hard hit for the Bucks, which I said earlier. They still have Oladipo. They still have Miles Turner. But they also lost Bogdanovich, who was very good for them last season. And that's going to hurt them. But they still have Sabonis, who I was looking at some numbers for, and he shot amazing from the field last year. 60%, 52% from 3 on 14 points per game. If he can just make that little jump to about maybe 18 points per game, 18, 19 points per game, this team could be very good, especially when Oladipo comes back. I wouldn't be surprised if this was a team who jumped up to possibly the 3 seed. I still don't think they're as good as the Bucks or the Sixers, but I think they could possibly be a 3rd seed. But since Oladipo is going to be out, and we haven't really seen these guys without Bogdanovich, plus we don't really know how Brogdon's going to fit in, I've got to put him at the 5. Now, my next team up is the Orlando Magic. And this just seemed a little high to me, but after looking at some of the other teams and looking at what they did last year, this is probably about where they're going to end up. Maybe a little lower. I can't see them going any higher, though. They were able to bring back Vucevic. That's really all they had as far as big moves. I guess if you consider Markelle Fultz a big move, he has potential for sure, but is he really going to take a step up, or is he just going to be a bust? I personally want to see him do good. Even if he just becomes an average player in the NBA, I would be happy with that, because obviously he's had a lot of controversy surrounding him. Team number 7, I actually put the Raptors, and looking back at it, I think I might change the Raptors to 6 and the Magic to 7. I think the Raptors are still good. They lost Kawhi Leonard, but they were still great during the regular season, and he did sit out a good bit of games. Siakam in the playoffs was very good. He's an amazing transition player. He's young, he's talented, and he's going to get nothing but better, more than likely, for at least the next couple of years. So I think this team could still be very good without Kawhi, even still. They have Marc Gasol, Kyle Lowry, Fred VanVleet. All these are good players who we could see still step up, and still this team could, in my opinion, still end up the 4th or 5th seed. that's why I said the bottom half of this East is going to be so hard to read this year. We're just going to have to see. Next team up, I have the Pistons. I love the Pistons, mostly just because of Blake Griffin, who had an amazing year last year. Obviously, he's been battling some injuries with his knees, and I don't want to see that, I don't want to say that's going to hurt his career, but I'd like to see him be healthy next year, and obviously, we all would. We don't like to see players hurt. And also Derrick Rose. I like Derrick Rose. Again, he's injury prone, but I think he's been kind of coming back here lately, and I think that's very good for this team. Andre Drummond also, who's a good center in this league. I'm not going to say he's amazing. He's an all-star. He's not a superstar by any means, but he is very good on the boards, and he's a decent offensive center, I guess. Again, this team was 8th seed last year. I think they're going to stay around that mark. I don't see them really improving too much, but it also is going to have a lot to do with how healthy they stay. If they don't stay healthy, then this team could fall out of the playoffs. We could see a team like maybe Chicago or any of the other teams really. Only teams I can really say I don't see making it are like Charlotte, New York. I don't know. New York could make a jump and get into the playoffs with Julius Randle and R.J. Barrett. But other than that, some of the other teams might have a small chance. But this East is kind of, the bottom half it's kind of hard to read. And I think this could go any way. Some of these teams could drop out of the playoffs just by losing one of their top players for 15 games. We could see one of these teams drop out and have a disappointing season. So I guess we'll just have to see how it goes. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we are going to move on to the Western Conference. So now moving back on to the Western Conference. This conference is a little more laid out, I think, than the Eastern Conference was. Obviously, it is way more talented, and I think just going through this list and going through these rosters, I think the top 2 teams in the East would be playoff teams in the West. But other than that, I don't think any of the other... I think it's possible that some of the other Eastern Conference teams, like anything below 2, would not even be a playoff team in the West. And it's kind of sad, looking at it and saying, why is the Western Conference so much better than the Eastern Conference? And I think it's just a lot of the teams have better marketability there. Obviously, there's 2 teams in LA. Some of the teams have built through the draft. It's just a stronger conference. But nevertheless, some of these teams could still fall out due to injury, anything like that. It's going to be a tight race in the West. So let's jump into the list, the power rankings. At number 1, I actually have the Los Angeles Lakers. Now, I'm not a huge Lakers fan. I do like LeBron James. I think he is a great player, a great role model. But I just think this team is going to be good. LeBron has something to prove this year, with last year kind of being, I don't want to call it a fail because I don't see it as a failed year for them. He obviously had some injury trouble. To me, there was too much expectations put on that Lakers team. And with it being LeBron's first year there, I think it was going to be tough for him. But you also have the big addition of Anthony Davis, who you can say they gave too much for. I think that whatever you got to do to win, you do it. You still have the young piece in Kyle Kuzma. So I think, and that's another thing about that trade, and I'm going to talk about it for a minute. This Lakers trade for Anthony Davis, they gave up draft picks, they gave up Ball, Hart, Ingram, but in my opinion, it was worth it in order to get Anthony Davis, who is a generational talent, and he's amazing. I mean, the numbers he's put up in the past, he's a very strong big in this league, and I personally just think that when you have a chance to get a top 5 player in this league, you give whatever it takes to get it. And that's what the Lakers did. So in my opinion, it was a good move. Plus they still kept Kyle Kuzma, who was really, out of all those young guys, he was probably the best. I hate to say that because I also think Lonzo Ball is a good player, but Kyle Kuzma is probably the most talented out of that group, and they were able to keep him. They also added DeMarcus Cousins, who, shout out, he did get injured towards ACL, I do believe, and that's tough. That's really tough on him. I think I remember seeing reports about he's been in, like, he's went ghost, like he's in a dark place. He's not really talking to anybody. Hopefully he's figured all that out now, but obviously it is tough on him because a guy who spent his whole life in the game of basketball just, all of a sudden getting injured back to back to back, and he was, a top 3 center in the league just a few years ago, back whenever he was with Sacramento and even that first year in New Orleans. But ever since then, he's had injury trouble, and it's really hard to watch, and my heart goes out to him. Also, the addition of Danny Green, who is a great 3-and-D player. Obviously, he struggled, in my opinion, in the playoffs a little bit in that final series, but I don't think you can judge him too much on that. He's experienced. He's going to be a good locker room guy, and I think they're going to do good. Also, you have Rajon Rondo, who I think over time has matured. Obviously he used to be a little bit of a personality, and didn't get along with coaches, but I think that as he's gotten older, he's gotten better, and he is going to be a good leader for this team, especially coming off the bench. Also, they were talking about playing LeBron at point guard, and I don't see that as a bad thing. LeBron he's a very good playmaker. As he's gotten older, he's gotten even better at playmaking, and I think he could be a point guard in this league. He's just really big, but so was Magic Johnson, so was Ben Simmons. He's just a big guy. That doesn't mean he can't play point guard, especially with this day and age. We're kind of moving more to positionless basketball, almost. So, moving on to the next team on the list. Now, you guys don't know this about me yet, but I'm actually a big Clippers fan. Been a Clippers fan since I started watching basketball probably 8 or 9 years ago. Back in the Lob City days, that was when I really got into basketball, and the Clippers were the first team I started watching. I saw them on TV one day, and I was like, this team is actually like really fun to watch, and they really got me into basketball. Watching Blake Griffin catch lobs from Chris Paul, and that's really what got me into it. So this team obviously has a soft spot in my heart, but this has nothing to do with that. I try to stay as unbiased as possible. Last year, I'll tell you, I even said we weren't going to make the playoffs. I wasn't going into that season very, very confident. I was saying we probably aren't going to make the playoffs this year. But they surprised the world last year, and they took the Warriors to 6. So I think that team had a lot of heart, and they were very good, and we didn't really lose any of that team. Still have Lou Will, Patrick Beverly, Montrezl Harrell, who are all good guys last year. And then all of a sudden, we get the news of Kawhi Leonard and Paul George all of a sudden coming to LA, but not the Lakers. They were coming to the Clippers, and I was ecstatic. I'll tell you, it was probably about 1 a.m. And I've been hearing, the reports, Kawhi's talking to the Lakers. Not very probable that he's going to go to the Clippers. And I was like, that kind of sucks, but it'll be all right. We still have a decent team. Then all of a sudden, I see on my phone, probably about 1 a.m., I'm laying in bed, and I see Clippers pulled off deal for Paul George. And I'm like, wait. I said, I was like, we got Paul George. That has to mean Kawhi's coming. There's no way they would have traded for Paul George if Kawhi Leonard wasn't coming. And then sure enough, 5 minutes later, it pops on my phone. Kawhi Leonard agrees to deal with Los Angeles Clippers, and I was ecstatic. I mean, that was huge, and personally, this is the Clippers' chance to kind of take over LA. This is going to be a very strong team, especially defensively. This is going to be quite possibly the best defensive lineup we've ever seen in the NBA, and I'm excited to see it. So, the reason I have this team at 2 behind the Lakers, as I said, I am a Clippers fan, but I didn't let that strew my judgment. More than likely, Kawhi Leonard is going to take time off. Paul George might as well, and that's going to kind of hurt him a little bit as far as regular season goes. But I think in the playoffs, both of these guys are going to play as much as possible, and they're going to be hard to beat. Now, my number 3 team is the Denver Nuggets. This team is young and talented. Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic, they're going to be very good, and they're both young. Funny story, I remember playing, I think it was like 2K16 or 17, and I ended up on the Nuggets somehow in my career, and we were the first seed every year, and I was like, why am I the first seed on the Nuggets? And then sure enough, all of a sudden they're a really good team, and I was like, wow. So maybe 2K predicted this, but no, this team is young and talented, and they really proved themselves last year in the playoffs, and I think that it was very good for them because kind of going into the playoffs, there was a lot of talk about, the Nuggets are probably the team that any other team in the playoffs want to see. They want to play the Nuggets because they think it will be an easier round for them. And they proved that wasn't the case. I mean, the Trailblazers did beat them, but it was in 7, and quite frankly, I think Nikola Jokic is maybe even the best big man in the league. It's probably between him and Embiid, and I think that Jamal Murray is young and talented as well. He's very good offensively, and I think that this team is very good. I put him at 3, mostly just because of what they did last year. Last year they had a good year, but they weren't the best team in the playoffs. They lost to the Trailblazers. But I think this team is still going to be a top 4 seed in the West. So next, moving on to the Houston Rockets, I have at number 4. I'm actually a big Rockets fan as well. I love James Harden. I think he's quite possibly the best offensive weapon in this league. The only other player I could say is probably just as good as maybe Stephen Curry and Kevin Durant, who's, completely different build, something we've never seen before. But Harden has a plethora of moves, and he's very good. Also, the addition of Russell Westbrook this offseason, and shout out to the Rockets owner. They kind of were like, what are the Rockets going to do? They had a bad year, got eliminated in the playoffs. Chris Paul is butting heads with Harden, and the Rockets owner's just kind of like, no problem, we're going to find something out. And there was a point where they were talking about maybe a deal for Butler, who I would have also liked to see on this team. I think that would have been a good move. And then all of a sudden, the deal for Westbrook comes out after the Paul George trade. And it was a very good deal in my opinion. I think Westbrook is going to be good. Obviously, it's Russell Westbrook we're talking about here. He's going to be great, not just good. And I think that there's a lot of people saying this team isn't going to work. This team isn't going to work. Obviously, they're like Westbrook and Harden can't play together. They both have the highest 2 usage ratings in the league. But I think that it's very possible that they could. They played together in OKC. Obviously, this was a time before Harden was the player he is now, obviously, in my opinion. Again, probably the best offensive player in the league. But Westbrook is also very good, and I think these two can make it work. They are good friends. They want to play together, and I think they're going to make it work. Now, I have said something ever since this trade happened. I've been saying this to anybody who I'm talking about basketball with, and they're like, "Oh, what do you think about the Westbrook and Harden deal?" And I'm like, well, either one of two things is going to happen. Either they're going to be really good or they're going to be really bad. And I think that could possibly be true. This team can either be really good with these two or they could end up being a train wreck. And I think if that happens, we're going to see Westbrook getting traded or something, because I don't see the Rockets getting rid of Harden or choosing Westbrook over Harden. But I do think this team will work. I think, obviously, 4 seems kind of low if I'm saying, this team's going to be really good or really bad. But it's the West we're talking about. Some of these teams are incredibly talented. Most of these teams are. And I think the 4 seed in the West is very strong. I think if this team was in the East, they'd probably be the 1st seed. And that's what's crazy to me. Now, moving on to the Trailblazers, who I have at number 5. The Trailblazers are very good. And they proved that last year, making it to the Western Conference Finals, where they did ultimately lose to the Warriors. But I do think that they're very good. Obviously, Damian Lillard, very good point guard in this league. Very slept on, in my opinion. He's probably a top 3 point guard in this league. Also, you have C.J. McCollum, who was good in the playoffs throughout some of the rounds. And I think that their problem seemed to be in that Warriors series that both of them didn't show up. It was like before the Warriors series, Damian Lillard was kind of, leading the team. He was the big man. And then all of a sudden the Warriors series comes around and it's not that anymore. CJ was kind of having to carry the team a little more, and I think if they can both get it on the same page, they'll be good. Now, also, I felt really bad for this team last year, losing Jusuf Nurkic right before the playoffs. It was truly sad, because I think this team could have been even better had Nurkic had been healthy in the playoffs and been there. They're going to be a good team, and he will be back this season, so I think we could possibly see this team do better. Obviously, I have them at 5, and again, it's just because this West is so stacked. Like, 5th seed in the West is a very good team. You're a very strong team if you're there. And it's hard to say, this team's going to be a 5th seed, but then I look at the teams above them again, and it's hard to say that they would be above those teams. So, moving on, I have the Utah Jazz, who I commended a lot for the addition of Mike Conley and Bojan Bogdanovic. Both of those were great pickups in free agency this year. And, well, obviously Conley was a trade, but it was, in the summer. And I think this team is going to be very good with Mike Conley, Donovan Mitchell. Obviously, still you have Rudy Gobert, you have Bogdanovic. This team is going to be dangerous. Oh, I almost forgot about Joe Ingles. This team is going to be very good. They're going to be good defensively with Mike Conley on the perimeter and Rudy Gobert inside. This team is going to be hard to score on. Probably going to be the second best defensive team in the league, right behind the Los Angeles Clippers. And it's hard to say, this team's going to be a 6th seed. But I don't really know if they go anywhere above that. And I think it's possible. I think, these seeds, I think after about 4, I think these seeds can kind of swap up. I think that, maybe we could see the Jazz perform a little better for just a couple games. Maybe the Rockets have a hard time figuring things out at first. And I think we could see the Jazz maybe jump up to 4, maybe the Trailblazers. Anything can happen throughout the season. These are obviously just predictions. I'm not saying this is exactly what's going to happen. But this is my predictions, and obviously it's hard to predict things like this because anything can happen. Now, moving on to the 7th seed, I have the Warriors, and I hate to put a team who, quite frankly, has been possibly the best NBA team we've ever seen before. The Warriors dynasty does seem to be kind of coming to an end. I hate to say that, but they could still surprise us. You never know. Now, the reason I have this team so low is because of actually Klay Thompson's injury. He's probably not going to be back until around the All-Star break, maybe even after the All-Star break. And without Klay Thompson, I think this team is not the same team. I've always seen Klay Thompson as somebody I've really respected because he's great defensively, he's great offensively. He is a full package. He's basically like your ultimate 3-and-D player. And whenever you lose that, it's going to be kind of hard for this team not having him at the beginning of the season. So I think if they don't start off strong, this team could be a 7th seed. Obviously this is not going to be easy for them not having Klay Thompson. Obviously, it was a great addition to get D'Angelo Russell. The sign and trade really worked out extremely well for them there. Kevin Durant did them very well. And D'Angelo Russell is very good. I personally think he was great for that Nets team. I'm actually kind of disappointed in the Nets for letting him go for Kyrie Irving. But I guess, you got to do what you got to do. But I just think D'Angelo Russell was great for that Nets team last year. He did a lot for them. And I'm sure it was kind of disappointing to, see that you were signed and traded. But I guess, you kind of have to look at it. They wanted some kind of return for Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant wanted them to get a return for him. So the sign and trade happened. I think he's going to make the most out of his situation. Obviously, he's playing with the Warriors. I don't think he's going to have a problem with it. But this isn't the same Warriors team from before. Now, moving on to the 8th seed, and this is a very hard one, actually, because there's so many teams that you can look at the bottom of the West and say, they could be a playoff team, they could be a playoff team. But ultimately, I went with the Dallas Mavericks. They had a good season last year, and I don't see why. I guess it's just hard to not put them here. They had a good season last year, not necessarily record-wise, but I think Doncic is an emerging star in this league. He had a great rookie season, possibly one of the best we've ever seen. And then the addition of Kristaps Porzingis, who is very good, and I think a lot of people are forgetting just how good Porzingis is. He's very talented. He's very skilled, especially for how big he is. And I think those two together are going to be hard to beat if they click right, if everything falls into place. Now, obviously, anything could happen. These two could not play well together. The team around them could not be built for the way they play. You never really know until the season starts, but I think that this team does have potential to make the playoffs in the West this year. Now, obviously, there's some teams that I left out, I know. And I don't want anyone to get angry because, maybe I left out your favorite team. Maybe you're a big Pelicans fan and you're like, oh, the Pelicans are going to make the playoffs this year. Just because they're not on my list doesn't mean they're not going to make the playoffs. Obviously, I'm not a basketball god. I don't know everything. I'm not an all-knowing basketball critic. This is just my opinion. So if you have your own opinions, feel free to share them down in the comments. I'd love to read them, read whatever you have to say. So I do want to go through and give some honorable mentions to some teams because I think that some of these teams do deserve a little bit more credit, and I didn't really give them that because this was just a power rankings video. The top 8 teams for who's going to make the playoffs. So let's start with the East. Again, the only teams I can honestly say probably are not going to make the playoffs for sure, like Charlotte. I think the bottom of this East could change so much. Miami, with the addition of Jimmy Butler, they could possibly make a move into the playoffs. Jimmy Butler could lead them there. Washington, if Bradley Beal continues to play the way he has, and maybe John Wall gets back healthy and gets back to the John Wall that he used to be, then this team could easily make the playoffs. Atlanta, Trae Young is amazing. He's a miraculous player, and John Collins is obviously very good as well. They picked up Cam Reddish and DeAndre Hunter in the draft, and this team could be very good as well. This team can make a move into the playoffs. Chicago, who has a very good young core, Zach LaVine on that team as well as Lauri Markkanen. This team can make a run into the playoffs. Colin Sexton and Darius Garland in Cleveland. That's a team that could possibly make the playoffs, especially if Kevin Love decides that he wants to play. And then New York City, obviously, I'm not going to say they can necessarily make the playoffs, but it's not too much of a stretch for them to make the playoffs in the East. They were not a good team last year at all. Obviously, 17 wins wasn't good for them. But they picked up Julius Randle and R.J. Barrett in the draft. This team could do very well next year and surprise a lot of people. And I just want to say something. For everyone who clowned the Knicks, like talking about how they had such a terrible offseason and free agency, they really didn't. They made a lot of the right moves, signing one-and-done deals. That way, next year they can go right back out and attack some more free agents, The only person they really signed kind of long-term was Julius Randle, and that was, in my opinion, a great acquisition for them because he was very good for the Pelicans last year, and I'm sure the Pelicans would have loved to keep him. So now we'll go into the West, give some honorable mentions, talk about each of the teams a little bit. I just didn't want to go too in-depth on all these teams because I feel like then I would be doing like a full in-depth analysis of every team. I don't want to do that. So let's go. The Spurs, obviously Greg Popovich is a great coach, possibly the greatest coach of all time. And I think this is a team that could maybe possibly slip into the playoffs, and I wouldn't be surprised if they did. With obviously still DeMar DeRozan and LaMarcus Aldridge on this team, they could be good. Sacramento, who had a very good season last year, almost made the playoffs. Obviously, they weren't necessarily super close. They were 39-43, and the Clippers, who were the 8th seed, were 48-34. But they were the 9th seed, and nobody predicted them to do that. So you never know. They could possibly make that jump. Minnesota, if they could ever just get all their talent together playing well. Cat is obviously super talented, but I just don't think I see this team making the playoffs. It could happen. I'm not going to say it's not going to, but I just don't see it happening. The Pelicans could surprise a lot of people, including myself. If Zion Williamson comes out and lives up to this hype and has an amazing rookie season, this team could be possibly looking at making the playoffs. Obviously, with Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, Drew Holiday, J.J. Redick, who I forgot to mention the 76ers lost, which was kind of tough on them. But yeah, this team, it's very talented. It has a lot of young pieces, which is the only reason I didn't put it in the playoffs, just because it seems a little bit too soon for them to make the playoffs. But it could happen, we never know. And then that's really the only ones in the West I could see making the playoffs that I didn't say. Obviously, Oklahoma City's probably not going to. We're not even sure if Chris Paul's going to be on that team playing next year. Memphis is a young rebuilding team. They're not looking to make the playoffs. Phoenix, Devin Booker is a great player, but I just don't see him making the playoffs. It's kind of sad on D-Book, but I don't see it happening. And, that's really the only other teams. So, there's my playoff predictions. Not my playoff predictions, but my power ranking predictions. And I want you guys to feel free to share yours in the comments. And let me know what you think I got right. Let me know what you think I got wrong. Obviously, I respect your opinions because I'm 100% confident that not all my predictions are going to be right. So I want you guys to share yours down in the comments. Also, I'm going to be trying to upload this podcast once a week. Obviously, I'm new to this, so if you have any tips for me or anything, let me know down in the comments. Anyways, I think I'm going to go ahead and end it off there. Thank you guys all for watching. Thanks and goodbye.